Hey guys, so I'm going to share with you something today which I know has meant a lot to a lot of people over the years, and that is this book by the wonderful Gary Wilson. Now sadly, I never got to meet Gary. I would have loved to have spoken with him, but for today all I can do is make this video in honor of him, to celebrate him, his work, and to help as many of us as I can. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the very best parts of this book, the stuff that really hit home. And this is quite interesting, guys, because obviously I've been on this path myself. So I'm intimately aware of what PMO can do to you. You know, I'd probably even say that in the past I hit, like a rock bottom because of it, at least mentally and spiritually. So for me, this isn't just like a casual book for you guys. It's a deeply personal thing. And it means the world to share this with you today, being clean and sober from PMO. Now, just a quick heads up, I do prefer to use the term PMO to describe pornography in general. I'm mindful that PMO describes the full cycle of things. For me, I don't really mind. I'm just going to use that term because that's what works with me. So let's get into it. If you, at any point in your life, have used PMO or have been addicted to PMO, I want you to notice today that you're going to have an ability to understand this message and the words of this book quite personally and quite intuitively. In fact, even when you hear kind of technical language, you're still going to get it. You know why? Because you've felt this stuff yourself. You've felt it. So when you hear things like sensory overload, super stimulation, or desensitization, you actually already know what these things mean, man. Because again, you felt them, you felt all this stuff in the past. And I really wanted to make you aware of that because you will probably get a lot of this stuff that we're going to talk about today quite intuitively, just by reflecting on your own experience. So bear that in mind. So what I'm going to do to start out is I'm going to share with you guys maybe the most powerful stuff in this book. And these aren't actually Gary's words, but the words that Gary has collected from anonymous people who have suffered and struggled with PMO. And the reason I share these guys is because for me, they are the most poignant parts of the book, right? Gary gives us a superb intellectual foundation to help us understand and map our own personal experience. But these accounts, they touch our soul. And so I wanted to start out with them just to really set the tone for us and to really kind of tune in to what we're actually talking about because, it's a lot heavier than we actually think. So the first account goes like this. It says, I don't think society knows what internet PMO really does to a man. All they really associate with PMO is ED, erectile dysfunction. I was socially awkward, depressed, had no motivation, couldn't focus, very insecure, and had absolutely no control of my life. So this person, what they've experienced, it speaks volumes for us, doesn't it? Because it highlights the ignorance that still exists and the kind of private suffering that we go through that is not yet socially recognized or acknowledged. Another account that Gary quotes is the following. It says, I've battled a few addictions in my life, from nicotine to alcohol and other substances. I've overcome them all. And yet this was by far the most difficult. Urges, crazy thoughts, sleeplessness, feelings of restlessness, hopelessness, despair, worthlessness, and many more negative things were all part of what I went through with this PMO thing. It's a wicked, awful thing that I will never have to deal with ever again in my life ever. Here's another one. It says, I will never get enough of what doesn't satisfy me. And it never, ever satisfies me. And then one more. And this is maybe the most profound. We hide in the shadows because we individually don't want to exist. Therefore, we collectively aren't thought to exist. When I read that, guys, I sat there in my garden. I just thought to myself, oh my God, man, that is painfully accurate. I've never heard that articulated before, and yet that's exactly what it is. So now what I want to do is I want to bring in Gary. So to bring in Gary and some of his wisdom, he says, it is the way that PMO users can overstimulate themselves that seems to create problems. He says, what is the brain to do when it has unlimited access to a super stimulating reward that it never actually evolved to handle? Gary also sums everything up really nicely with these incredible words. He says, "This is about the effects of chronic overconsumption of sexual novelty delivered on demand in endless supply." Right? I'll be honest, guys, to actually hear this, read this, or take this on, it takes some balls. You know why? Because I can remember being addicted, and I can remember hearing about this book. And what I remember specifically was how little I wanted to read it. You know why? Because I knew what that would have meant. In my experience, the act of reading this book represents you facing the truth. It represents you facing yourself. And once you know, you can't really go back to how you used to be. In fact, the tactic that I used to use personally to prolong my addiction was to remain as ignorant as possible. So basically, bullshitting myself. Because if you don't know what you're doing to yourself, it's not as real. It's easier to ignore. But what happens is, because we're quite, aware naturally, we have awareness, PMO and its clutter, it doesn't go anywhere. It just chills in our subconscious. And our subconscious is sort of like, are you ready to look at this? Do you want to look at this or what? We can't hide stuff from ourselves. We can't lie to ourselves either. At least not for too long. Because deep down in our soul, we know exactly what we're doing to ourselves. And this soul level awareness, it's precisely what we need if we want to actually wake up and unshackle ourselves from this awful life-ruining addiction. So just before we get onto the more positive, uplifting stuff, I do actually want to remain in the darkness and in the shadows just for a little bit longer, because I want to talk more about the darker stuff, the darker things that this book can bring up for us. So one phrase in particular that caught my attention and kind of triggered some memories for me was this phrase, multi-tab internet PMO prowl. What this brought up for me personally was memories of the thrilling dopamine adventures, being on the hunt, being on the search for the ultimate thing, which of course is the best and most exciting stuff. The thing that this book really does well, by the way, is it explains that although dopamine is sometimes referred to as the pleasure molecule, dopamine is actually about seeking and searching for pleasure, not pleasure itself. Thus, dopamine, it arises with anticipation. So if you think about all the experiences that you've had yourself, where you're just kind of endlessly trying to find the video, the image, whatever it is for you, have a think about that. Likewise, if you've also had experience like this, you would know that this search, it involves acquiring certain tastes. And I don't just mean the weirder things that you never thought you'd be attracted to. I'm talking about almost becoming a kind of connoisseur of PMO. Because as Gary points out, PMO sites, they engross us with inexhaustible sexual novelty. Therefore, you might find yourself sort of handpicking and choosing and selecting the most valuable gems, the stuff that is most thrilling and exciting, the really high quality material that maybe even at some point you brag about or share with your friends. And I know it sounds low and it sounds really weird and strange, I know. But my teenage self did this, man. And I have no shame in that. You know why? Because when you're in it, and you're really in it, you don't really care. Nor do you see what you're doing. You're just too damn desensitized, such that you just pass around this extremely explicit stuff for just stupid and novel reasons. Right? It's kind of like passing around hardcore drugs. But again, when you're in it, you really just can't tell, man. That's what's happening. Now, we're almost into the light, guys. We've got a little bit more darkness to cover. So another thing that Gary references in this book is the idea that addictive activity tends to fuel further activity rather than satiating it. So for me, guys, this is just the single-handedly the biggest trap that we all fall into, because what it means is we experience the chaser effect. So when we try to satisfy our cravings by acting on them, what happens is we then feel more desires, and sometimes stronger desires, in the following few days. And the really tricky thing about this is it can lead us to binge. And when we binge, unfortunately, we lose ourselves completely. As Gary says, we can be with multiple tabs open, clicking for hours, trying to get it while we can, because our minds are just perceiving this moment like an evolutionary jackpot. So what happens to us is this powerful neurochemical incentive kicks in for us to grab as much as we can and for us to get it while the getting is good. The problem with this, spiritually speaking, is we sort of lose our soul in the process. And then on pretty much every level imaginable, we feel depleted and we feel like we need to hibernate for like 5 years in order to let this depression pass and to return to a somewhat normal state. Now, thankfully, guys, we can take action. We can talk more about the positive side of things. So Gary says, freedom lies in allowing your brain to return to natural, normal sensitivity and to weaken any addiction pathways. Only then will you be truly free to set your own priorities. He says, resensitize yourself by eliminating all artificial sexual stimulation. So this means no surfing online, no social media, no dating apps, no erotic literature. He says, if it's not real life, just say no. Gary also mentions that you need to rewire your sexual arousal to real people. You don't need to be intimate per se. In fact, slowly getting to know someone is probably the best path. However, physical touch, in-person physical touch, is also very, very important. Similar to this, guys, PMO, what it does when you remove it is it reopens the space for natural rewards, so stuff like friends and partners. And in my experience, if you can get yourself outside and in the presence of other human beings, something happens where you feel good when you speak to them, where you sort of meet another person and you say, oh, hey, look, I can see you're existing over there. I'm existing over here as well. This is pretty cool, isn't it? Just simple stuff like that, man. And when I first started to do this, when I was really serious about quitting PMO and just kind of going outside and living life, what I would do, because my anxiety wasn't like a clenched fist anymore, is I would go outside and just speak to strangers. And it's weird, guys, but afterwards I felt like Superman, because I'd given myself and my mind opportunities to receive natural rewards through eye contact, smiling, and physical touch, right? It's really interesting, but the answer to this struggle and to so many things in life is just to strip back everything, become really simple with how you live, and just enjoy the small things that are completely free in this moment. So now to start wrapping up, I want to end this video with the following quote. It's a quote from the book, from another nameless account. And it says the following. It says, live as if PMO didn't exist. Honestly, guys, if you can just do that, you'll take yourself pretty far. Because a lot of this stuff is just us falling back into the same bullshit patterns over and over and over again. PMO is far too readily accessible, right? We live way too much like it exists for us. But what's interesting is it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to exist for you. What you want to do is you want to set up your life as though PMO doesn't exist. You want to choose not to include it in your consciousness or your little bubble of reality. You want to say no. That is the thing to do if you're really serious about getting clean from this. And not just for like a week or a month, but for the rest of your life if you want to. And just imagine for a second what you would do if that happened. Just imagine how proud you would feel. Like, seriously. Just imagine looking in the mirror and saying, I did that for myself. Right? That's what we want to be doing. So go towards that. Finally, guys, if anything has touched your soul today, if anything has resonated, and you feel inspired to take some action, I do offer coaching. And so if you're interested in that and you'd like some support, then feel free to click the link in the description. Otherwise, if you've enjoyed this one and you'd like more, then my friend, please do subscribe.